Good morning, everyone. Happy Thanksgiving week. Krystal, grateful for you.
Oh, thanks. Same, Em.
Thank you.
Always a fun time with you here at the desk.
Well, you know, it's a blast, and we should probably try to beat our record today, maybe go to like 4 or 5 hours.
Be real, I don't know if I have that in me. I'm still recovering from seeing Wicked this weekend.
That's right. You saw Wicked
many hours
9 in the morning.
In front of the movie screen, but it was great.
Good.
Yes.
I'm glad to hear it.
Big fan. I am excited about the show today, though, because we have some exclusive reporting. We actually sent out producer Griffin, who's going to join us in studio, to talk to some of those AOC-Trump voters and get them in their words as to why they made the choice to vote for Donald Trump and then down ballot vote for AOC. JL Partners helped us identify them. So I think you guys are going to find this really interesting. I certainly found it really interesting. We'll bring that to you exclusively. We also have a bunch of updates on the Trump transition. His cabinet actually now full, complete. Not to say there aren't other slots he's got to fill that aren't cabinet level, but he has, you know, at a very rapid clip, put out his nominees here. So we'll bring you some of the most interesting choices, including Attorney General nominee now Pam Bondi, who was the Attorney General of Florida. That was, to fill in for Matt Gaetz, who had to withdraw his nomination. Emily covered that for us last week. Also, another really interesting one, the woman that they chose for Department of Labor. So she is a very rare person, which is a pro-union Republican. She was one of the only Republicans in the House that supported the PRO Act, so a bit of a surprise there. Tell you what that means potentially for the future with labor and unions, and a bit of a conservative, like, business-friendly meltdown on that side of the aisle with regard to that pick. We also have some updates for you with regard to last week we brought you the news that the ICC has now issued arrest warrants for Bibi Netanyahu, Yoav Gallant, and a leader of Hamas. We're taking a look at which countries are actually going to abide by international law and would arrest Bibi, or saying publicly they would arrest Bibi if he were to be on their soil. So significant development there. Meanwhile, Elon apparently thinking about buying MSNBC. The memes are flying, Emily.
Yes, and many of them are flying from his keyboard.
Indeed.
Yeah, they range from, well, genuinely funny to very disturbing.
True. Very true.
Some.
As memes do.
Yes.
As memes do.
Yes.
And I'm also taking a look at MSNBC. You know, I really think even if the network continues in some sort of like hobbled form going forward, which it likely is going to, the role that it has served in terms of the Democratic Party, it's over. I mean, the combination of Trump winning and then Joe Amica bending the knee down at Mar-a-Lago has completely nuked that channel. And so, you know, what comes afterwards, you know, is that a good thing? Is it a bad thing? I'll get into all of that in my monologue. I've obviously got a lot of thoughts on this one.
I'm not surprised to learn that you have more thoughts on this, Krystal, and I'm very excited to hear them.
Yes, indeed. All right, let's go ahead and get to, we'll bring Griffin in and reset, and then we will bring you that video of AOC Trump voters and why they made the choices that they did. So as I was just saying, we have Griffin here in studio with us to help break down these conversations that you had with people who actually voted for AOC and Trump. We had a number of women who we were able to speak with. So set up a little bit for us what you asked them and what your general takeaways and vibes were.
Without giving like too much of a spoiler, it was interesting because like for Trump, the reasons were all pretty much the same. It was immigration, it was wars, and it was like the economy. With AOC, it seemed to be more of her personality, her charisma, and kind of like her like celebrity star status, but also just like this feeling that they felt like she was real, that she was real and that she like actually cared. So that was really interesting. It was a range of voters. There was some people who were high information, like they've been tracking it for about a year, and some people who kind of made their decision within like the last day or two. But yeah, the range of answers, as we'll see in just a second, were pretty similar from the majority of the voters.
All right, well, let's go ahead and take a listen to what they had to say.
Why did you vote for both Trump and AOC in 2024?
Because America needs a role model. And I think Donald Trump is a role model.
The border, you know, the people coming to U.S. illegally, the murders, everything, all the crimes are increasing.
The Democrats really haven't done anything for us that actually made the situation worse in New York. So I thought this time around, let's just give Trump, a chance. Maybe, he can make things better.
He's very business minded. And I also feel that being that he has these connections with other leaders, it can prevent war from happening in the future.
When Trump first came, those 4 years, It was, ups and downs, but it was nowhere like, it was no war. We didn't have any fight with other countries.
How does AOC fit into that picture?
She's like that sister that will always defend you. She'll fight, she'll scream till a bloody pulp if she had to. She's truly a fighter.
Is there a little bit of like a New York realness that they both share? Is that what I'm hearing?
Oh, yeah, definitely. So much that they could be like brother and sister almost.
I like that they're very outspoken. They really have, I think, no filter.
If you look at Joe Biden, there are a lot of things probably he wouldn't understand about our generation or the future generation. And also Donald Trump as well. He's aged too. So we need someone above and beyond, like more new generation and would understand more.
I just voted for her honestly because the other people I didn't know about, and her I just always hear about. It's like crazy. So I thought, she's a familiar name. Let me just vote for her.
My mother was like, vote for her. So I was like, okay.
That's great. That's
go
enough.
against the
Listen to your
moms.
mom. Could you compare Kamala and AOC for me? What is the difference between the two of them?
I just feel that Kamala has a position as a vice president already. And I don't feel like she did much in the position that she held for the last 4 years. I feel like she used entertainers for promotion, and I didn't like that at all.
She doesn't bring anything to the table. Even if she was a first woman president, she doesn't know what she's doing. And she's going to, not give us a bad name, but it's just, we're going to go from bad to worse. Because I feel like our country's doing so bad now.
AOC really tells you what she's going to do rather than Kamala, where she's just more broad. If you're going to change the world, if you're going to run for president, start now. You have your vice president now. You can start now. Tell us what you're going to do.
How do you feel about the war in Gaza? How do you feel that the U.S. and how they've handled it? And did that affect your vote at all?
In a big way, yes. We just don't want any war, and we don't want innocent lives to be killed without any reason.
It's crazy what's going on there, and we need to fix it. It needs to stop. And I think Donald Trump will be able to maneuver it. I hope he does.
New York have so many issues here with high rent and working all the time. Like, it's like you care about it, but you have so many other major important things going on in your life that just comes before that. And it's just sad to say.
Do you think that Trump is anti-war?
I'm not sure.
I don't think President Trump wants to make war with anyone.
If Trump was in office during that time, we wouldn't. A lot of things that are going on with the migrants, the war, I just don't believe a lot of these things would be going on.
If Trump had been president, I really don't think it would have gotten this far.
Would you vote for AOC for president as a Democrat?
Yeah, I would give it a chance.
I mean, I don't say that women are not equal to men, but I think she might need to work on her education of world news, like her way to communicate about it and the policies and everything. She will be good, maybe.
If Trump were to use like the military, let's say if he were use the army to start deporting people from cities, is that something that you would support?
I would definitely support that because I think that would be the only way to get the deportation process started. We're talking about criminals. We're talking about mobs, a lot of gang members. And I mean, who else would be able to do that but the military?
I think it's really a case-by-case basis. I feel like a lot of them just come here and get away with things. I don't think the police is doing what they should right now. I really don't think they care.
According to Trump, we will no longer have any more presidents after him.
Does that worry you?
No. Not at all. We need to get rid of Congress, the legislation, the laws, everything just needs to be rewired and rethought out. And let's just start this whole thing over again.
So interesting. So Tashina there at the end is burn it all down.
Let's start it all over.
Get rid of all the Congress. Just let him do whatever he wants to do.
No more
my
presidents.
language.
We don't have to work anymore after that then.
That sounds good.
No more
No,
elections.
nothing else to cover, so we can all retire.
Shut it down. Yeah.
There was so much that was interesting about that, though. I mean, surface level, the reasons match a lot of what you see in the polls. Immigration was important. Inflation and the economy was important. But there was so much texture there that was really different. And the other thing that came across to me in watching these voters, and like you said, some of them were more high information, more tuned in, and some of them were less engaged in the day-to-day news cycle, which nothing wrong with that. But in both respects with Trump and AOC, what they really have in common, more than anything else, is star power.
Yep. New
They've
York
got
realness.
huge name ID, huge star power. You know, so you had the one woman saying, like, I just hear about AOC all the time.
Sure.
You know, so I feel like she must be doing something because I hear her name a lot. And I do think that speaks to one of the things that's been absent from the Democratic autopsies that are going on is like Trump is a celebrity and controversy has served him. And the fact that his name is in front of you and in the news all the time. And AOC is also this sort of controversial celebrity. And in a certain sense, that really serves both of them and is probably the model for politicians that both parties need to follow going forward.
100%. And not only that they were like celebrities, but that they were real and they were fighters were the things that I kept hearing over and over again. Not only that there was like a star status to them, but
what they were fighting for wasn't that important. It was just like, I feel like they're going to get in there and they're going to do something.
And oftentimes I would ask them like, well, you know, I know AOC and Trump fight for very different things. They have very different opinions on things like immigration, but they didn't really care because they knew that both these people were passionate and they fought for what they believed in, which they just didn't get a sense from people like Kamala and other Democrats. And it seems like they almost just respect that more, even if it's like not, even if they disagree on a certain issue.
Yeah, that's important. And also what they believe in fundamentally in the minds of especially casual voters who don't spend their days thinking about this is helping the country. And to the point that you brought up, that can be very different things. But if they believe that you have their best interests at heart, then they just sort of have to put the trust in the candidate that they ultimately go with. And they're not super partisan or ideological. So I thought that was really helpful, Griffin. I wanted to get your take on immigration because this is not exactly a very white district. And that mattered a lot to these voters, contra the media narrative about how it would be turning many, many people off. And you know, Donald Trump would be dead on arrival, especially with non-white voters because of the immigration issue. In New York City, you're a New Yorker, that did not at all turn out to be the case. What did you hear?
Yeah, it was really interesting because it seems very almost localized of an issue. You know, I live in like central Brooklyn and, you know, we don't really hear a lot about the immigration issue, but where AOC's District 14 is, it's a little bit of the northern top of Queens and then a large part of the Bronx. And up there, it just really seems like the immigration issue has affected them a lot more. And I was really curious after talking to all of them because all of them would bring it up as like their number one thing, that their streets didn't feel safe anymore. They talked a lot about 57th Street, which I guess is a big intake center for immigrants. So I did some research, and in the last 3 years, almost 250,000 immigrants have come through New York City. Currently, right now, as of August,
in the last 3 years?
In the last 3 years, about 250,000. But currently, right now, as of August, there's about 64,000 in the city being housed in like hotels, intake centers. They even have like an old airplane runway where they have some of them. And Mayor Eric Adams has been trying to do a lot.
Another fighter.
Yeah, another fighter, another New York real one.
Another patriot.
But you know, Eric Adams has been doing all sorts of things across the broad. Like Eric Adams, he recently traveled to Latin America to hand out flyers about how expensive New York is, so you shouldn't come. And so he's trying all sorts of strategies.
Is that where Istanbul is?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, some geography lessons. But like they also, what I found out recently is they have this new rule for sheltering where you can only stay in the hotels now for 30 to 60 days, and then you have to apply to be able to stay in, or you get kind of dished to the street. And I think that's where we're seeing a lot of these women, these voters, noticing a lot more people on the streets now because they're not in the hotels anymore, because after that 30 days, they're now in a tent on the sidewalk
there's
somewhere.
More visible sort of disorder.
And they're linking basically anything to those immigrants, any crime, any gang activity. They're kind of just immediately linking that to the immigrants. And yeah.
But it's a sanctuary city, right? So that's where people,
Yes,
if
you can
people are
apply for
on the
asylum.
streets, right? So if people are on the streets, they remain on the streets. That's, unless there's like housing, to your point, that steps in.
That's right.
And all of that, which seems to also be frustrating the voters.
Yeah. And then to the military deportations part, which I wanted to ask them about, you know, because that seemed to be just a big kind of national talking point about will Trump use the army to bring people in? And the core thing to them was they weren't really scared of that because they were really sick and tired of it. And it seemed to me that it was pinned on that they found the NYPD to be incompetent and unable to handle these issues, which I kind of don't blame them. I mean, as a New Yorker, I mean, you see these cops on the subways, they're mainly going after like ticket fare people and on their TikToks, you know? So
It was funny because that's something that you would never, from a top line analysis, you would never get the texture of that, like, oh, they're like anti-police.
Right.
And that's why they're like, I guess you got to bring in the military because,
Exactly.
and it is true if you poll institutions, one of the institutions that has the highest level of trust in the country remains the military. So that logic is really interesting and not something that you would sort of guess from the outside, but does, from their perspective, make some sense. The reality of what that might actually look like may create a different impression.
Right.
But coming in, that's not a non-starter for them whatsoever. The other thing that was really noteworthy and that did not turn up as much in the surveys about why people voted the way they did is that all of these women seemed concerned about war. They seemed concerned about Gaza in particular. The one woman who I'm blanking on her name, I know when you first asked the question, she said, like, basically peace. That's what I'm most interested in.
I believe that was Nazia, yes.
Nazia,
and she was
yeah.
the most informed. She'd been really paying attention to almost all the politics for about a year, so she was the most informed. But all of the women were aware of this. None of them were like, what's Gaza or what's going on there? Like, everyone clearly has been seeing some glimpse of what's happening and not liking it.
Yeah. And so if you're, the Democratic Party, Kamala Harris, trying to position yourself as this moral authority, that really undercuts it. And whether or not it's true that this wouldn't have happened under Trump, clearly his talking points had broken through with these voters, whether it was ascribing all crime to immigrants, when, the stats will tell you that undocumented immigrants actually commit far fewer crimes than native-born Americans, but that talking point had landed and connected and was being repeated. And the talking point about, hey, if Trump was there, I don't think we would have had all these wars, that also had clearly landed with them. And it was funny to me when you asked them, like, do you think that Trump is anti-war? And one of them was like, I don't know, but, maybe it would be different.
To that point, like, these women, like, some of them were like, oh, Trump's a role model and stuff, but they were also very clear-eyed about who Trump is and the likelihood of him fixing all these problems.
Yeah.
Essentially, how they saw it was they knew Kamala was like a known quantity, and they knew she wasn't going to do anything to fix these problems.
Right.
They weren't sure if Trump was really going to fix these problems, but they knew Kamala wasn't. So they're like, well, let's just roll the dice again. Which is funny because, like, Trump has been president before. You'd think he'd be more of a known quantity, but to them still, he was the dice roll gamble of maybe something different, but none of them were sure.
Well, and I want to ask about that because for many people, voting is seen as like a civic duty. You do it even if you're ambivalent about the candidates. What sense did you get of why actually some of these women chose to vote? I mean, we saw, I think her name was Margaret, with her baby that she was hanging out with while you were doing the interview. These are busy. I mean, these are busy people. Everyone is busy. They have an option to not vote if they're ambivalent. That's something that's like totally understandable and common. Like, if you don't think either of the candidates is great, you just sit out the election. It sounds like even with some of this ambivalence, these mixed feelings about Donald Trump, actually went out and voted anyway.
Yeah, they were just desperate, I think, for
change.
Just change in a large sense on a few different issues. We didn't have a ton of sound bites in this footage about the economy because I could sense that sometimes people feel a little uncomfortable talking about the economy, whether it's kind of a morass of an issue to kind of have the right words to describe it. But people just felt like things just like weren't working for them. Things were getting more expensive. And 3 of them, I believe, were actually mothers. And I did ask them all about the child tax credit and under Biden that they all received. And they spoke of that really fondly. But at the same time, they were, they're Republican voters. They didn't want handouts. They just wanted things to be more fair.
Yeah. You hear that a lot.
You got a little taste in there. You asked, okay, would you vote for AOC for president?
Yeah.
Is that something you'd be open to? And one of the women had this response that was like, well, I'm not saying women aren't equal to men, but, maybe she needs to do a little more work. Were there any comments that they made about Kamala Harris and her gender? Was that important to them? Was that a positive? Was it a negative? Did it not, was it indifferent? What was your sense?
So there was a lot of talk about misogyny, but I don't feel like any of them were misogynist, but they viewed the foreign policy and working with other foreign leaders and them being misogynistic to women. And so that it would just be naturally harder for a female to be president and deal with all these men of the world, which, you know, isn't like maybe technically that false. Like, you know, I'm sure there's some misogynistic world leaders.
They have kind of a clear-eyed view of the world. Of like, well, I'm not sexist, but sexism is a real thing that exists.
Yeah.
Right.
So maybe, you know, we gotta have a man in there so that he doesn't have to deal with that.
Totally.
Effectively.
Absolutely.
I think a lot of Democratic primary voters are gonna, this has been my prediction, is like they're never gonna nominate a woman again for a similar reason of like, well, I'm not sexist, but I think the rest of the country is.
It's like a self-fulfilling loop, right? Where if you believe it, then you feed into it as well.
Yeah.
But they also always talked about how Trump was so good with world leaders, that world leaders just like to get along with him. And that was his like secret sauce to like stopping wars. And they all mentioned like there just wasn't that many wars when Trump was around. And now there's a bunch of wars and the Democrats don't seem to be anywhere near stopping all of them. And there doesn't seem to be a clear reason to these voters why any of them are happening.
Yeah.
They just think there's no reason. There's no reason. We don't understand why they're happening.
Yeah,
And
interesting.
I know this is zeroing in on one part of New York that's not like a lot of the rest of the country, but in many ways it actually is like a lot of the rest of the country, because if you look at that Washington Post map that we were covering all night here on election night, you saw movement towards Trump in many, many places. Now, Trump still lost a lot of counties, but there were big swings in places like New Jersey and places like New York. And there was also a lot of ticket splitting, even in places like Florida, where the abortion referendum, it didn't hit the 60% threshold, but it got really close. It was like at 56%. So you had a lot of people voting for Donald Trump and voting for abortion to be in the Constitution of the state of Florida. That happened all over the country. So I think, Griffin, it's just important to say that, yes, while a lot of the country looks at New York in particular as this sort of like alien world, like it's Mars, this is something that happened with voters everywhere else.
Absolutely, yeah. And, you know, none of these voters are like white men. You know, like three-quarters of these were mothers. They were all working class women between their 30s and 40s. And yeah, they just...
None of the bros wanted to talk to you, Griffin?
None of the bros.
The mustache man. They were like, this guy's too powerful.
I'll shave for the bros.
Too alpha.
But yeah, like these women were, you know, although some of them had some things that you might not agree with Trump about, whether he was a role model and stuff, they were just all very clear-eyed that, you know, why not? We'll see what happens, because right now things just aren't working for me. And I thought it was just so interesting when they talked about like Kamala versus AOC, because they just felt like Kamala just didn't really stand for pretty much anything. They just were open to thinking about her and just seeing like what she had to say, but they like couldn't remember or think about like what she was all about in the way they felt that way about AOC. And I think it's a testament to it's like, I think they could vote for a Democrat at some point. If they were, and even if they didn't agree with all the same issues, because it seemed to be like a core thing of like respect. Like I respect that you care about things, that you're passionate, that you're not hiding who you are. And those things seem to surmount like any of the individual issues because they all love AOC.
Yeah, and that's been my thing is like I think that a lot of times liberals look at politics in the wrong way, like thinking that you can just go down a checklist of like our issue set is more popular if you poll it than their issue set, when that sense of like this person's a fighter, this person stands for something, this person isn't just like pandering to me, they're gonna get in there and they're gonna mix things up, those personality traits and that energy and that celebrity, frankly, I think is also really important. Is kind of the common thread that connects why you would vote for a Donald Trump and then check the ballot for AOC. Great job with these, Griffin.
They all loved really Liz Cheney, though.
Oh, well, I mean, that's a uniter across the board, right?
Should have left that in the cut.
Also, I love when you come on the show, and for people who know producer Griffin, follow producer Griffin, he's doing sort of a Ron Burgundy look today.
Watch out, you're going to start dating yourself with that reference. That's an old millennial reference.
That's an elder millennial reference. But we don't often see you in a tie, and out of respect for Sauger, it was important for you to put the tie on.
Yeah, we don't want Sagar to be distressed
Not
while
on
he's
his
out
honeymoon.
trying to
On his
enjoy his
honeymoon,
honeymoon. So that was very kind of you,
Of course,
Griffin.
absolutely. Anything for Sagar. I was worried he was a little too skinny. I was a little too RFK Jr. maybe, but
Yeah,
Not
well, we'll
enough.
get his
Not
after
enough.
action report.
Yep,
when he gets
absolutely.
back.
But yeah, and I really like to thank JLP partners. They're polling. They've done a lot of great polling for us over the last year, and they did the hard work of finding all these people for us.
Yeah.
And so definitely check out them in the video description for this video.
Awesome. Thanks, Griffin.
Absolutely.
Hey, if you like that video, hit the like button or leave a comment below. It really helps get the show to more people.
And if you'd like to get the full show ad-free and in your inbox every morning, you can sign up at breakingpoints.com.
That's right. Get the full show, help support the future of independent media at breakingpoints.com.